We'll get to the latest update on details on a potential Article 5 convention, sometimes known as a Constitutional Convention or a CON-CON for short. Share that with you in just a moment. I do want to mention today looks like it's going to be a banner day on Wall Street. People, after watching the president last night, have a lot more confidence in the direction of the country. Sometimes you just need that. The economist Robert Samuelson has written that it's all about confidence. And he says that that's what turns an economy around when people suddenly have faith in it again. Well, a lot of people out there might be thinking, what am I going to do with my money as times get better? How about you give a telephone call to the friends of ours here at the radio station, Waddell and Reed? Waddell and Reed, located here in Twin Falls, and this is a firm that's been in business since 1937. Waddell and Reed, one of the oldest companies in the country to offer mutual funds, and in fact, Waddell and Reed owns and manages two mutual fund families. Investing is done by a conservative nature. These are people who obviously, after 80 years in business, folks, obviously they know what they're doing. And they'll take an approach, which is a planning approach when it comes to your individual needs and your goals. And they try to help you build proper expectations. At Waddell and Reed, they build those plans around those needs and goals and help you manage money. And Waddell and Reed, they take planning personally. So I have this message. This came in from Tom Munns last night. Tom's been giving daily updates on what's going on with a potential Idaho getting involved with a potential Article 5 convention. Now, what are we talking about? Well, the subject has come up off and on for the last year, really, on this program. The history of it is John Kasich came to Idaho a year or two ago and made a plug for this. On the surface level, this is being argued for. It's a great idea in the sense that there are conservatives in this country who believe we need a balanced budget amendment at the federal level, an amendment to the Constitution, so that we can start paying down the terrible debts this country has. Because if we don't get that controlled, then we won't have a country in a few years. Everyone, the people that we owe money to, will come here and just saw this country to pieces to try to take back what they feel they're owed and what we told them we would pay back. So on the surface level, the idea sounds really great, an Article 5 convention, because it could happen. You could amend the Constitution. Congress could go ahead and propose an amendment, and then we would need, the states to come along and say, all right, we approve. If Congress won't do it, there's been an argument that the states then themselves, that's the other option you have, the states themselves, and when I believe you get to 34, there's a two-thirds majority needed, but when you get to 34, that you can then call a convention of the states, and the states can add that amendment. Now, the supporters of this idea, Tom Coburn, who's a good man, he served in the U.S. Senate, he's a doctor, he was very much a budget hawk. Tom Coburn is behind this. He came to Idaho just a couple of weeks ago to promote it. I saw a letter writer in the Press Tribune out of Nampa criticize him today, trying to lump him in with George Soros. Now, Soros may be behind this because we'll talk about that in a minute, the nefarious reasons. Coburn's involved because he thinks controlling spending is a good idea. And he believes that you could put this together, and so does John Kasich's on board with this, and several legislators potentially here in Idaho, that you could call this convention and just focus it on that one amendment. We've told you before, the fear is that if you get a convention together of the states, even though you have promises they would just make that one amendment for a balanced federal budget, that instead, indeed, it could get out of hand and they could rewrite the entire Constitution, which is what the Convention of States originally did when they brought an end to the Articles of Confederation. And I was reading a story about Madison the other day, who's the father of the Bill of Rights. Madison's writings, I mean, he vacillated back and forth on a lot of these things. But he told a college professor who was doing a biography of Madison in 1830 before Madison died that they closed the doors and they didn't talk to the public or the press for 6 months. They had absolute secrecy. So if they did something like that again, could they rewrite the entire Constitution? Could they eliminate the Bill of Rights? That's the fear with all of this. Now, this thing has been reported out to the full Senate for debate here in Idaho. Tom Munns is the state coordinator for the John Birch Society, and he's not allowed to often speak publicly in the name of the John Birch Society, but because of his involvement as a political lobbyist, he's got a good handle on what's going on at the state capitol. And he wrote me and said last week Idahoans from across the state and all aspects of the political spectrum turned out and unanimously told the Senate State Affairs Committee to reject a call for a constitutional convention from Idaho. Nevertheless, many of our legislators ignored their constituents and voted instead with special interests from outside Idaho to send the bill to the Senate floor with a do pass recommendation. The full Senate is expected to debate and vote on the CON bill. That is SCR 108, 108 to be more proper. If you'd like to know more details, they're doing it today. So there are a number of activities that opponents have organized, and right now they are meeting with other concerned Idahoans outside the Senate chambers, talking to legislators as they arrive. They have signs, and they're going to be joined by a Benjamin Franklin impersonator. That's how you get the media to show up. You get somebody in a Ben Franklin costume, media will show up. That way you make TV and newspapers and websites, which is the goal in this day and age. You have to put on a good dog and pony show to get the media's attention. Coming up at 10:15 this morning, they're going to be entering the Senate gallery. They can't take their signs inside, but they're going to watch the debate. And if they can turn out a big crowd, the goal is that a big crowd in the gallery will at least put some pressure on members of the state Senate, and hopefully they will not vote to advance this bill. At noon today, they're going to be returning after a brief lunch to the third floor outside the Senate chambers to engage with legislators as they leave for lunch, then join a speak out against the CON until 12:30 p.m. And now he goes on to say, earlier this week, Wyoming passed a call for an Article 5 constitutional convention. That means only 5 states are now needed for the CON to be called. So he writes, we need to stand up and defend the Constitution before it's too late. Now, again, we're criticizing a lot of legislators for perhaps voting for this constitutional convention. You've got to remember, your legislators who are supporting this are not doing it because they're evil and they'd like to take away your constitutional liberties. They're doing it because, on the surface level, they'd like to control federal government spending. Every conservative would like to do that. Every libertarian would like to do that. The fear, though, is, and again, if there is just a slight window that could be left open for the entire Constitution to be rewritten by a constitutional convention, then we shouldn't do this. And even people who are voting for it for all of the right reasons, that is to control runaway spending, may be setting up a runaway convention. And that's been the concerns of the demonstrators and the people who are opposed to this. There have been some politics make strange bedfellows, as one of the old adages. I'll add to that. There was a letter that was written. It showed up in that very same newspaper that the letter I saw today criticizing Coburn was printed. And it came from a Republican and a Democrat who had joined together in saying this is a really bad idea. George Soros is involved in the background with all of this because Soros sees this as an opportunity, and he's convinced a lot of people to go out and sell this to legislators around the country because it's his goal to get his tentacles into this convention and try to rewrite that Constitution. Now, his fingerprints are all over this, but you probably won't find a paper trail. That is the big threat. We're about 10 minutes away from 10 o'clock. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Telephone number if you'd like to reach our program today, 736-0300, 736-0300. Now, if Wyoming voted for it last week, Idaho would be the latest domino to fall. And then, as I say, that would leave us, I think, at 29 or 30 states. 34 are needed to call this convention. So Steve Millington brought it up yesterday. I think so we have to discuss some point he made. We don't know what the composition of this convention would be. If every state just sent 2 representatives, maybe they could control it. But if it's done proportionally, which is California. More than a tenth of the U.S. population lives in California. There are nearly 40 million people there. There are what? Maybe 330 million Americans tops. So California could send 10 to 12% of a delegation or the total delegation. If we're going to have a convention of states and the door is open a smidgen for someone to rewrite the entire Constitution, do you want California to dominate that convention? And California would be there with New York, which would probably send about 5 or 6% of the delegation. And it would be there with Florida, which could send perhaps 7 or 8% of the delegation. It isn't long before a few big states, if they're doing it on a proportional basis, before a few big states would have over 50% of the representation on the floor. We have a telephone caller looking to join us. Caller, you're on the air at 9:52 on KLIX.
Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
If there are no George Soros fingerprints on it, how do you know he's in it? How do you know he's opposing it?
I have I'm going on the emails I'm getting from the JBS, the John Birch Society. And there was a writer last week who wrote from an organization called Wolf PAC. That is Wolf PAC for Political Action Committee. And the writer was in favor of this. And he wrote a letter to, he had a guest newspaper column in one of the capital area newspapers. It was in fact the Press Tribune out of Nampa. He wrote a letter in support of this constitutional convention. As it turns out, Wolfpack has been officially identified as being a political action committee funded by George Soros.
So you've got the one group that you can tie in with it then.
Right. But Soros himself would deny involvement if anybody asked him, even though Soros' money, of course, is behind the creation of this wolf pack.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you very much for the call. 736-0300, the number to reach us, 736-0300. I wrote a note last night to Senator Lee Hyder, because he represents me in my district. And I just dropped him a short note, and I like the guy. He's a pleasant man. I think he's got a good head on his shoulders. I think his heart and his mind are mostly in the right place. And I dropped him a note, and I tried to keep it very polite. And I thanked him for all of the hard work he has done on my behalf, serving me in my Senate district. But I told him I think this is a really bad idea. I said, I know on the surface it sounds great, and we all would like to control spending, but we're opening up maybe Pandora's box here. And I would think that people around the state have been doing this. You just don't know, because I may be the guy who writes and says, I'm opposed. There may be 3 other people in my neighborhood who said, you know what? We need to control government spending. I'm in. Now, I've given some people a hard time about this topic over the last few weeks because I don't want to spend, I do a 2-hour show, but the actual time available to talk in the show is 77 minutes. That's after you subtract newscasts, commercial breaks. I've timed it all out in the past. 77 minutes. We have a lot to talk about. We have a president in Washington who's trying to rewrite the culture there of the way that city works. We have a president, in fact, right now who might be the greatest agent of change we've had in that city in over 100 years, if not longer. We've got to address that on a daily basis. We have roads that are crumbling beneath the wheels of our cars right now all over the state of Idaho. We've got to address that. We've got to address the possibility we may see the worst flooding here in 20 years coming up this spring. We've got a number of other issues competing for our attention on the local level and on the state level. And we've got the American left that is still trying to, they're not going to go down quietly on issues like illegal immigration or Muslim refugees or having grown men go in and share the public restrooms with your little girls. We've got all of these topics that are going on. But I do understand our liberty could be threatened if this constitutional convention goes off the rails. And that in itself, all of these other issues could then become secondary if that happens. Another caller joining us. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air on KLIX.
Hello, Bill?
Yes, go ahead.
This balanced budget amendment, it's really a bunch of hooey because, it only takes 50% of the House and the Senate to balance the budget. And they've failed to do that year after year. The Republicans have controlled the House and the Senate for years, and that's where the budget can be controlled, and they don't do it. So they don't abide by the Constitution now. Why will they abide the Constitution if we have a balanced budget amendment? And I
Well,
agree with you.
this is the
Opening
problem.
the
The
doors
states,
for a runaway convention is a big, big problem.
but and I think this is part of this. Looking at this, I can see why so many state legislators would like to have some say in this because they're so frustrated with the fact that their fellow Republicans in Washington aren't doing it. But I think that we shouldn't let our frustration rule the decision.
That's correct. And if we wanted to balance the budget, there's two ways to do it: reduce spending and increase taxes. A balanced budget amendment doesn't necessarily decrease spending. It just says that you'll balance the budget, and another way to balance the budget would be to raise taxes. And
Uh-huh.
if the politicians here in Idaho are so interested in reducing the budget, then they shouldn't be accepting all this money from Common Core. They should take our lands back so that the federal government doesn't have to spend all that money that it wastes, managing the land here in Idaho. They could have saved millions of dollars when they had that. Remember that big bill that they had to reconvene the convention, the legislature for
Well,
for
on that note, I got to let you go
deadbeat dads.
because I'm running up against a hard break. But points are well taken. I thank you much for chiming in. Coming up on news from Fox at 10 o'clock, followed by Rush Limbaugh on KLIX. And God willing, if the creek don't rise, I'll be back in this chair tomorrow morning between 8 and 10 o'clock. Got some great guests coming up tomorrow. I believe we'll be joined, in fact, by one of those state legislators from the Elmore County area.